Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Was in Rosario Vampire. If you guys enjoy this what if, and want to see part 6 of it, comment down below and let me know. The like goal for this video is 200 likes. So like this video, to let me know that you're interested in this series, and you want the next part. And go ahead, and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Naruto stood back to his full height, and turned around with a scowl directed straight for the woman who stood there with her arms crossed, and numerous shinobi around her 8, if he counted correctly. Don't get in my way, Tsunade. The alarms were still blazing, even as the Hokage gave the Jinchuriki a cold glare. You will not be leaving. Now get back in your room and maybe your punishment will be lightened. What a convincing argument. Naruto replied sarcastically as he took up a fighting stance with his left foot forward, and his hands balled into fists. But I'm sorry, I'm leaving this place and going after Sasuke, whether you like it or not. So that's the reason. Tsunade thought as the shinobi around her got ready for a fight. You have one last chance, Naruto. Don't bother giving me a last chance, I'm not going to make use of it. He shot back. Kurama, I'm going to need your chakra, I can't waste my time here on these people. The only response he got from the Biju was a sudden rush of power as his entire body lit up in a golden glow. Naruto shot forward from his spot, cracking the ground where he had been. When he reached the group of shinobi with Tsunade, 9 arms made out of chakra sprouted from his body and grabbed one person each, and threw them away, as if they were nothing but pests. He took immediate advantage of the situation and rocketed up the nearby staircase, ignoring Tsunade's shouts for him to stop. On his way to the top of the underground base, he encountered shinobi from all different villages that tried to stop him in his tracks, but they were dispatched easily enough. Finally, he reached the top floor of the base, that was literally right under the surface, only he stopped and frowned when he saw who was standing in front of the stairs that led to a thick, steel door. Are you going to get in my way as well? Naruto's cloak that appeared, when he was using all of Kurama's chakra swayed behind him, while the high collar with 3 Magatama on each side of it ruffled slightly, when a cold breeze blew through the room, despite there being no connection to the outside. Tusan. A male flight attendant whistled a jaunty tune as he made his way from economy class, through business class and straight for first class. He opened the door that led to the hallway which connected first class to the rest of the plane and walked in, not stopping his tune the entire time. He did stop his whistling though, when he noticed the state of the area. The trays and carts that had been stacked with mainly food and drinks had been sprawled everywhere, as if a drunk had stumbled through and managed to knock everything in his way over. No, that probably wasn't right. The drunk wouldn't have managed to knock everything over and push it from one end of the hallway to another. Looking over in the direction where everything had been sent to, the flight attendant felt his face lose some color when he saw what had happened to the emergency door. It was closed, thankfully, but there was a large dent in it, as if something heavy had crashed into it. That is a problem. Who the hell are they? As soon as Naruto's clone asked a question, he felt something from behind pull him backwards until his body collided with the wall and window he'd broken when he'd made his entrance. Probably shouldn't have broken the window. He murmured as he realized that he was being sucked out, or was trying to get sucked out anyway. He managed to hold on by using his chakra and the natural strength that Senjutsu chakra gave him. This is definitely a problem. For all of you it is. The clone glanced up at the sound of the man's unconcerned voice to see one of the 4 he'd asked about looking at him rather smugly, but it was a different one that was speaking. We'll be fine though. He figured as much. If he was correct in his assumption that these guys were also Thunderbird like he, then they could fly, and would easily be able to get out of the situation. Bastards. A loud screech came from outside. Thunder rumbled. The clone grunted before a plume of smoke erupted in front of him, revealing a perfect replica of himself. The newly created clone went through a few hand seals and slammed his hands onto the ground of the airborne vehicle, while the others watched on curiously, wanting to see what would happen. Kanji spread out from the replica's hand, and traveled all across the room, covering the ceiling, including the dent, floor, walls and windows. Even as every part of the room had kanji connected to them, they still moved, overlapping each other until there was no where anyone could look without seeing them. Suddenly, the clone who had been all but a part of the broken window, fell back onto the floor. No more air tried to suck him outside into the dark and stormy clouds, no sound came from the other side of the plane. The clone stretched to get rid of the kinks that came with being in an uncomfortable position, while his replica vanished in a puff of smoke. Okay, let me repeat myself, who the hell are they? He pointed his index finger to the 4 who were still standing at the door. 2 small plumes of smoke erupted at the original Naruto's wrists as shuriken appeared in his hands, before he put his wind chakra into them, and hurled them at the hovering Thunderbird. The weapons sliced through the air in dark clouds, with the wind chakra given to them having extended their radius far beyond its normal size. Noticing the weapons flying towards him at relatively impressive speeds, Kia to the side of them, and consequently further away from the plane. shuriken kept appearing in Naruto's hands, and every time they did he put his wind chakra into them, and throw them at his enemy, while walking down the plane, to stay in range as the Thunderbird kept having to move to the side and away from the plane. These things are annoying, he thought before letting out a loud screech as he dodged another set of wind chakra enhanced shuriken. Thunder rumbled around them. Good. Naruto smirked when he noticed the yokai a fair distance away from the plane. He held his hand above his head, palm faced up. Chakra started to form in his palm, and started to rotate in multiple different directions. The chakra became visible to the naked eye as Naruto started to pour more of his chakra into the technique until it formed sphere. It didn't stop there though. The already basketball-sized sphere of chakra kept growing and growing until its size was easily quintuple that of his own body. He seemed to realize how far away he had been forced away from the plane, and gnashed his sharp teeth together, before soaring straight towards the blonde, who had a massive ball of something held just above his right hand. He paid whatever it was no attention though. All that was on his mind right now was completing the task he'd been set by his organization's division leader. Can't fly fast enough. Naruto got a sneer in return for his taunt. Maybe if you were more like I am. He disappeared from view as he used the Hiraishin marker on Kia's head to instantly appear there, causing said yokai to gain a shocked expression. He'd have had a better chance of surviving. The shinobi brought his hand which had the massive sphere of chakra in it crashing down right where the Thunderbird's golden feathers met the beak. The Rasengan shredded the feathers and grinded through the beak with relative ease. Kia himself let out a loud and high-pitched screech of pain that caused a ringing noise in Naruto's ears as his head was forcefully pushed downwards from a perfectly horizontal to a 45-degree one, causing him and the one he was sent to kill to nosedive right underneath the plane. The Thunderbird fought to stay conscious, while the sphere kept grinding into him. The golden feathered wings at his side went slack from not having enough concentration along with the rest of his body as he tried to keep his eyes open. Luckily for him, Naruto needed him alive for the moment, and as soon as the blonde realized that they had started free-falling he cancelled out his technique and held on to the golden feathers tightly. The we are doesn't matter. The Thunderbird on the far right stated. He said he was a clone, so killing him would be pointless, and I doubt a copy of the original would have much power. His light blue eyes narrowed. He looks different from before though. Where did the blonde hair, yellow eyes and whisker marks come from? The only reason he could actually tell he was the same person that Kia had engaged was that whatever energy he had, something that all humans had, but usually only in minuscule amounts, was mostly the same, albeit to a smaller degree. I suppose you don't have to tell me willingly. The clone shrugged casually, and closed his eyes as a cocky grin that suited his face rather well came into existence. It only means I have to beat every single one of you into a bloody mess. You think you could? The two quadruplets in the middle sneered at him in a challenging manner, while the one on the far right rolled his eyes and the one on the far left remained stoic. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. His grin dropped, and his yellow eyes flickered over to his three friends who hadn't moved from their position for a brief moment. Sukune, Milka-chan, Kurumu-san, go and take a seat. This won't take long. But Sukune went to protest, but stopped himself when Naruto looked at him, and glared for nothing more than a short second. You're only going to get in their way. He could almost imagine the shinobi's voice telling him exactly those words. His fists clenched at his sides again. He knew he would only get in the way, but he needed to vent his anger, needed something to lash out at. The human glanced over at the corpse of the flight attendant and his frown deepened. Why? Why does she have to be killed? All she had been trying to do was escape. She probably had a family, friends, maybe even a lover, that would miss her too. And that yokai had just killed her without a second thought. But, Naruto-kun, there's Fu. Mocha started, cutting Sukune out of his rather depressing thoughts, and bringing him back to reality. Mocha. The vampire flinched slightly as Naruto hissed and interrupted her. Go sit down, and let me deal with this. They came for me, and only me technically the boss, but that doesn't matter. The point remains, that you don't need to get involved. She went to protest again, wanting to at least be of some use. He could take her rosary off, but he leveled her with a look that made her take an involuntary step back. His eyes, even though they had turned yellow instead of his usual blue, were still his, but there was something in them that she'd never seen before. Instead of the usual carefree gleam he had, they were hard, serious and cold. The red and slitted pupil that had remained on the girl's rosary sparkled with some interest. I didn't actually think he could take anything seriously. Even when he fought at the school, he seemed so carefree and unconcerned. What's different this time? Kurumu had seen the admittedly intimidating look he'd given Mocha, and decided it was best to listen to the blonde. Besides, if he really needed help she could just jump in, even if the one in front of them was just a clone. She placed a hand on Mocha's shoulder. Come on, if he says he can handle it then we should believe him. Sukune took a deep breath and felt the anger he felt bubble up inside of him. When the flight attendant had died, was murdered, he corrected himself start to ebb away, even if the confusion was still there. The more logical side of his mind took back control, and he nodded at Kurumu's suggestion. Yeah, Kurumu-chan's right, Mocha-san. Unconversing. Naruto's attention went back to the 4 identical yokai as his friends moved to the opposite end of the room. Yeah. He shifted into what most people would see as a lazy stance. Yeah, I am. They fell through the dark clouds. The thunder that been rumbling around them every so often had disappeared. It started to rain. Naruto held onto the golden feathers like his life depended on it. He stubbornly refused to let go. He needed to find out who he was working for. Kurama let out a snort. You haven't even been in this place for long, and yet you've already got an organization out for your head. Despite the situation, Naruto felt his eye twitch at the amused tone of his partner. You're hopeless, you know that. Naruto was silent for a few moments before he let out a sigh. I should have expected something like this. The creepy headmaster did say that there would have been others that felt my chakra when I arrived here. No, you shouldn't have expected something like this. Kurama shifted around in his spot slightly, his 9 tails swinging behind him, as if they had nothing else to do. His tone turned into something akin to a teacher lecturing their student, or even a parent scolding their child. Hell, maybe it was something that an older sibling would use on a younger one when they made a mistake. Naruto would never know. What you should have done was prepared for it anyway. Even when this yokai called you over to have a talk with you, you were still completely relaxed and unconcerned. I can. Naruto tried, but the biju wasn't quite finished yet. And now look at the situation you're in. The friends you made at that school are on their own with only a single clone of yours to protect them while you fall to the ocean below. As if to go with his words, they broke through another dark cloud, and the ocean came into the blonde's view. You can't let yourself get overconfident, Naruto. Just because you're no longer in the elemental nations, doesn't mean you can let your guard down so easily. The plane-sized Thunderbird let out what sounded like a rather pathetic whimper, while Naruto remained silent for a good while. I'm sorry. He finally said to the being made of chakra. But I'll make up for it. I'm not going to let anyone else I care about die just because there's people coming after me. I'll obliterate this entire organization if I have to. They weren't far from the water's surface anymore, probably around 50 meters or so. Naruto prepared himself. He let go of the feathers, and stood on just his 2 feet. 25 meters. He tensed his legs and bent his knees. 15 meters. With the immense physical strength granted to him by Senjutsu chakra, he was able to jump and counter the momentum he'd gained while falling, albeit with some difficulty. Kia, however, was barely holding on to his consciousness, and as a result he was sent plummeting into the water. Naruto noticed this after he'd landed on the water's surface, and grabbed the golden feathered wing that was protruding out of the water with both of his hands, before lifting the Thunderbird's entire body up and over himself, only to slam him back down on the water's surface, back first. The water kicked up around the Thunderbird's large form, forming miniature waves that rippled away from the yokai. The clone dashed along the carpeted floor of first class. The kunai burst into existence from the seal on his right wrist, and he held it firmly. The 4 yokai, that looked exactly the same, hadn't moved an inch, but they looked ready for a confrontation. He reared his arm back, and launched the kunai at them. That made them go into action. They separated, 2 went to the left while the other 2 went to the right, and the kunai embedded itself into the door they'd been standing in front of. The clone didn't stop, just changed directions, and ran straight for the 2 who'd gone to the left. He reached them in just a moment, and lashed out with a punch that was caught by one as the other Thunderbird grabbed his wrist. They severely underestimated his height and physical strength, while using natural energy though, and the one who caught his fist was sent rocketing back until he smashed into a window, breaking the glass, while blood ran out of his now sideways nose. A sudden rush of wind came from the broken window, but the seal the clone had put up before quickly took care of it. The light blue-eyed yokai who'd grabbed the shinobi's wrist stared in bewilderment at him, only to find himself face to face with the carpet as Naruto had grabbed his own wrist, and flipped him over. The clone brought its foot up before slamming it down on the back of the Thunderbird's head, resulting in a loud crack to reach everyone's ears as the body went slack. Almost done. He murmured before quickly jumping up, and planting himself onto the ceiling, just in time to dodge a bolt of lightning that had been sent straight for his unprotected back. Did Naruto-san just dodge lightning? Sukune asked in disbelief while the hole that had been torn into the side of the plane by the attack was covered up again. I think so. Kuruma murmured unsurely as Naruto launched himself from the ceiling straight for his other 2 enemies. The 2 yokai stood perfectly still. Lightning sparked behind a pair of light blue orbs as Naruto's body came rocketing towards them. That's not going to work. The shinobi almost effortlessly twisted his body out of the way as a bolt of lightning whizzed past him, tearing another hole in the opposite side of the plane, which was quickly dealt with. Even as a clone, he's able to maneuver his body out of a lightning bolt's range. You were Muse, becoming more and more interested with the human and the chakra that he used to fight, even if she'd never openly admitted. Now within range, he planted his hands on the ground and spun his body around, so that his legs span around with him, and aimed to land a kick to both of their faces. Biting back a scoff, one of the identical Thunderbirds simply tilted his head back, while the other jumped away to create some distance. And it was a smart move on his part, as he bore witness to the other Thunderbird's face contort into pain, as if he was struck by an invisible force, before he was sent sailing back, and sent through the wall to the outside. The powerful force tried to pull them out almost instantly, but it quickly disappeared as Kanji swiftly crawled over the humanoid-sized hull that had been created. Is it really possible for humans to actually do this? Sukune thought in awe, his feelings over the flight attendant's death forgotten for the moment as the clone disappeared from view, only to reappear behind the stoic-looking yokai. Lightning crackled behind his light blue eyes as he stared at the human behind him. Unfortunately for him, even though he was only fighting a clone, he was far too slow to get his attack off before a hand was wrapped tightly around his throat, dangling him in the air and consequently severing the concentration he'd had on his attack. Naruto's yellow eyes glared straight into stoic light blue ones. The Thunderbird didn't lose his stoic expression, even as the clone choked him until his body went slack and his conscious mind left him. The body dropped to the floor, and the clone glanced at the friends of his creator, while his eyes returned to their normal state and color. He's unconscious, as well as the others. I still need them alive. For now anyway. At the end of his sentence, his eyes glazed over slightly, as if he was remembering something, before he shook his head and a small poof of smoke originated from his wrist. Naruto made his way over to Kia's head, and glared straight into the half-lidded, and somewhat glazed over eye, that was closest to him. What's this organization, that you spoke about before? Can't speak properly. The blonde faced his palm up into the air, where another Rasengan began to form. Maybe another one of these will help. A brief flicker of fear flashed through the twin light blue orbs, as the defeated Thunderbird remembered what the technique had done to him. He gurgled some more, probably on his own blood. 1. Don't bother. The spiraling sphere of chakra grew in size. The way I see it is you either give me the answers I seek and die painlessly, or you don't, and I slowly grind this into every part of your body, slowly killing you in the process. That was a lie. He wasn't sadistic enough to do something like that. Then I can just go and nicely ask your comrade, or comrades, that are up in that plane. The sound of metal clashing against metal reached the shinobi's ears as Kia grinded his teeth together. The silence wore on for a good 10 seconds before Kia made his decision as the light in his eyes began to get dimmer. If he was going to die, then he sure as hell wasn't going to go out without screwing over the ones who'd sent him on this task. Fairy tale. Fairy tale. Naruto repeated, blinking slightly. What a bizarre name for an organization. Even the Akatsuki had a meaning behind the name Nagato, Yuhiko and Konan had chosen. Buspecific. He stopped himself when he noticed the light blue eyes lose any life they had left, while a choked breath escaped the Thunderbird's giant form. He sighed, the giant sphere of rapidly rotating chakra dissipated and his eyes returned to normal. The name of it isn't much to go on, but maybe whoever else is up in the plane will know. A small plume of smoke erupted next to the blonde, to reveal an exact replica of himself, only for the copy to disperse the same way a second later. He waited a moment until he felt it, a light tug on his chakra, as if something was calling out to him. He disappeared while the Thunderbird's giant corpse began to sink in the middle of the ocean. Sukune looked at the tri-pronged weapon that Naruto's clone had embedded in the ground with interest. It was the same one, maybe not the exact same one, but still that the blonde had shown him the day Kurumu had entered their little group. At the time, Naruto had said his father created it, but he'd also implied that it did something other than the obvious. The human would be lying if he wasn't curious as to find out what it could do. Boy, was he surprised when Naruto, the real Naruto, suddenly appeared out of nowhere, right where the kunai was, crouched down with the same carefree and nonchalant smile that was usually plastered over his face, quite the contrast to what his clone's expression was before. Glancing up at the replica of his friend, Sukune noticed that he had also lost the cold expression he had been wearing, and was instead smirking at Kurumu, and his own stunned expression, while Mocha just blinked a couple of times. Yo? The blonde greeted with a wave as his smile widened slightly. His clone disappeared, and in his momentary daze of pushing the sudden influx of new memories away to sort through later, he didn't see the blur with pink hair barrel into him, sending both sliding along the carpeted floor. You're right, and you're not a clone this time, or at least I hope you're not a clone. She rambled as she laid on top of him before babbling incoherently about how relieved she was to see he was okay. Naruto flushed slightly at the feeling of her breasts pushing up against him before chuckling. I didn't know you had such little faith in me, Mocha-chan. The vampire let a small smile cross her face at Naruto's joking tone, before his body shifted slightly. You think you can get up, Mocha-chan? I thought you would have enjoyed her laying all over you like that. Naruto's face got brighter and Kurama grinned. Quite. When Mocha had gotten off of him, Naruto walked over to the yokai who had been choked into unconsciousness by his clone. He flipped the slowly breathing body over, so that he was on his back, before planting his hand on his chest, and sending a rush of chakra through the unconscious body. The Thunderbird jolted up so fast that Naruto had to actually move his head out of the way, so he didn't get his head smashed by the yokai zone. The usually stoic-looking light blue-eyed male's expression was pained, as if something was going through his body and killing off his own existence from the inside. Naruto didn't have any time for sympathy, so he grabbed the collar of his leather jacket and slammed the Thunderbird in disguise back onto the carpeted floor, causing a short gasp of pain to escape his fellow blonde. What do you know about fairy tale? Sukune gained a weird expression on his face as he witnessed the blonde's sudden change in demeanor. First, he's all serious, and then he's back to his casual self, only to go back to being serious again. What was up with his friend? He shook his head to clear himself of his thoughts, and brought himself back to what Naruto was doing to a clearly injured person. Naruto-san, what are you doing? Demanding information. The shinobi spared a glance at the other human, before bringing his glare back to the yokai's pained expression. Don't make me repeat myself. I'm not going to say anything about fairy tale. He spat back as his hand grabbed at Naruto's wrist, in a vain attempt to force the blonde to release the blonde's grip, with his eyes glaring straight back into Naruto's with clear defiance. Kiyuel. What? Naruto interrupted. He wouldn't do anything, or more like he can't do anything anymore. He's dead, already sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Along with the unnamed yokai, Sukune's eyes widened at the implication. Naruto-san, don't tell me you. Yeah, I killed him. Or more like I was the cause of his death. Naruto replied, referring to the fact that while he hadn't attacked Kia, while he was drawing his final breath, the yokai only died because of him. Sukune gained a scowl at his admission. The anger and confusion he'd felt before once again rising up within him. Sure, he didn't know this Kia, and that he was more than likely the one who'd gone after Naruto, but even so, he'd been alive as well. Why would you do something like that? Moka and Kurumu decided to stay silent as it seemed like a discussion that the two males needed to have on their own. While Moka never liked people dying, she understood yokai like herself. Even though Naruto was a human, it was basically in their nature to kill others for whatever reason they have. Kurumu wasn't very fond of it either, but she wouldn't let the deaths of others affect her, so she was pretty much indifferent on the matter. Sukune, on the other hand, was a human, and had been raised by his parents as such. He hadn't been around any deaths besides funerals of family members he hadn't been all that close to in the first place, much less violence to the point of breaking bones and such. So Naruto guessed that his anger and confusion on the matter was pretty justified. He hadn't grown up as a shinobi either, his lives revolved around death and violence. Hell, if there was ever a day that someone didn't get killed back in the elemental nations, people would start to get unnerved, as if they had a feeling the ground was going to suddenly swallow them whole, or that the sky would suddenly start cracking until it caved in on them, or you get the idea. Later, Sukune. Naruto didn't loosen his grip, even as a pain that he was rather familiar with entered the yokai's eyes, and it wasn't from Naruto's chakra in his system. You're lying. The yokai gritted out, the grip he had on Naruto's wrist loosening. No, I'm not, Naruto said coldly. And you'll follow him to the grave if you don't give me the answers I'm looking for. He gestured to the other two blondes, one lying face down with a small pool of blood around where his face was planted into the carpet, and the other one in a heap near a broken window that was covered up by the seal his clone had placed. Or maybe if you won't answer, those two will. The Thunderbird's expression hardened. I won't let you touch them. He snarled, lightning crackling behind his eyes in anger. Then give me the answers I want. Whatever grip he had on Naruto's wrist slackened as his hand fell back to the carpeted floor, followed closely by his head. Fine. He sneered at his siblings' murder. I don't know much about it though. Kia was the only one who actually joined them. We just kind of came along. Tell me. All that I know is that Kia worked under a man named Miyabi, and that there's 7 divisions in the organization. He sighed, his eyes glancing over at his defeated siblings with some concern. That's all my siblings and I know. Naruto let go of the man's jacket, and stood up with a sigh. He despised himself at the moment for taking away someone that was obviously precious to the yokai, but he didn't exactly have a choice in the matter. Grab those two. He gestured to the Thunderbird siblings with a wave of his hand. And get out of here. I don't ever want to see any of you again. His fellow blonde grunted, the feeling of something trying to wipe him out from the inside suddenly disappearing. Well, it greatly confused him. He let it be and grabbed his siblings before making his way to the human-sized hull that had been created when Naruto's clone kicked his other sibling out of the plane. He doubted his brother was dead. He could fly after all. After the stoic he'd regained his usual expression upon standing up, Thunderbird had left with his siblings. Naruto trudged over to one of the cream-colored seats and plopped down in it. We'll talk later. He called out to the others as he relaxed himself. I don't know about you three, but I'm tired after that ordeal. Wait a minute. Sukune began, glancing at the numerous holes that had appeared during the fight between Naruto's clone and the Thunderbirds. What about all of these holes? Don't worry about them. Naruto replied. The seal my clone put up will act as a barrier to keep the outside of the plane separate to the inside, so long as I keep my energy flowing through it. The black-haired human nodded a bit hesitantly, not really knowing whether he should trust kanji which were floating over the holes that'd been a result of the fight. He decided to in the end though, as they had been doing a pretty good job so far. Fine, but I want some answers later, Naruto-san. Naruto sighed. Yeah, we'll talk later when we get settled in at Vegas. Once everyone had went and sat down in one of the cream-colored chairs again, Kurumu turned to Mocha, doing her best to avoid looking at Tsukune's still somewhat angry and confused face. Hey, Mocha, what type of yokai do you think Naruto-kun is? She asked as she'd never seen a yokai do all the things that Naruto could do before. Sitting on an identical and equally comfortable chair right next to the succubus, Mocha turned to look at Kurumu with a slightly uneasy smile. I don't know, Kurumu-chan. I haven't asked him. Oh, come on. The blue-haired girl pouted. You suck his blood all the time, you must know what he is. Sorry. She apologized, not liking how she was lying to Kurumu, but she couldn't tell her that Naruto was a human. But I really don't know what he is. Kurumu sighed at not getting an answer she would have liked, but accepted it and rested back into the chair. He patted down his leather jacket and black loose-fitting pants, before scratching at his blonde hair that had spikes here and there. After that damnable clone of that human had kicked him out of the plane, he took advantage of the situation and flew away. He went searching for his sibling almost immediately, only to find the now dead Thunderbird sinking in the ocean. He'd sighed at the time, before he flew straight towards the place he'd heard Key murmur about when he mentioned something along the lines of Jai Kurosama and promotion. He knocked on the double doors to the mansion rather loudly, making sure to get whoever was there to come to the door and answer. It didn't take long, before he heard the sound of footsteps and the door opening. Is there something you need? He gulped slightly, unnerved by the man in a butler uniform with red, slitted eyes. Only one race had eyes like that, vampires. Sorry for the intrusion. He tried to put as much sincerity into it as possible. But I need to speak to Jai Kurosama, it's business. The butler grunted, looking displeased as he fixed him with a distasteful look, even as he moved out of the way to allow him entrance. After closing the door, the butler started walking down a hallway, muttering all the while. To think that Jai Kurosama would ever allow such a low-level yokai into the Shuzen manor. The aforementioned yokai glared at the back of the vampire's head while he followed, as if he was trying to burn holes through it with just his eyes. Technically, he could do something like that, but he wouldn't dare to do something like that to a vampire. Arrogant assholes. They came to a stop outside a wooden door. Enter. The blonde blinked a few times, rather surprised at the feminine voice that came from the other side of the door. Never mind that, how does she even know someone was out here? That guy didn't knock or anything. Without showing any signs of hesitation, the butler obeyed the woman's voice and opened the door, walking inside first as he saw no need to be polite to what he saw as a weak yokai. Jai Kurosama. The butler grated, bowing to the back of a chair that someone like an emperor would be seated on, which was facing a widescreen TV hung up on the wall. There's a yokai here that claims to have business with you. The chair turned around slightly, and the Thunderbird was able to get a glimpse of red, slitted eyes, and a head of light blonde hair. I already knew that he was here. She regarded the other vampire in the room coldly. Are you questioning my detection abilities? Of course not. The butler replied a bit tensely. Then leave. You know where the door is. The light blonde hair and red eyes disappeared from his view as the butler obediently made his way out, unaware of the sneer that the weaker yokai had sent at his back. What are you here for? Well, Jai Kurosama. He started a bit hesitantly before building up his courage and straightening up. You sent my brother Kia, a member of the 1st Division I believe, on a task to assassinate a man named Naruto. He said, remembering what the blonde's friends had called him. Jai Kur didn't reply. She didn't personally send people on assassination missions with the exception of Akio and Kala. She just ordered one of the division leaders to send someone to do the job. Ah, she remembered who she wanted killed. Apparently he was called Naruto. She sensed an absolutely massive burst of some sort of power right from the comfort of her own home some time ago. She could tell it wasn't Yuki fairly easily, so she had ordered the 1st Division leader Miyabi to take care of whoever it was. She didn't want any variables or unknowns interfering with her plans. If you're here, then I'm guessing that your brother failed in his task and was killed. She asked, glancing around her chair to see his reaction, which was a small, almost hesitant nod. She growled silently to herself. Failure wasn't accepted. Well then, seeing as he's already dead, then I guess you'll be the one to take the punishment in his stead. What do you Maya? Before he could even finish speaking, he coughed up some blood and looked down to see an arm going through the right side of his chest. His eyes traveled up from the arm, ignoring the gladiator-like shoes that he saw out of his peripheral vision, to the slim and athletic body covered by a short black dress that went down to mid-thigh, until they stopped on the cold and slightly sadistic eyes of Jai Kuro. I won't accept any failure to be around my organization. She smirked, twisting her arm that was in his chest around, causing a grunt of pain to escape him. When there is failure, it results in punishment. She finished before wrenching her arm to her own right, slicing straight through his ribcage, spine and heart. Looking at her arm, she let out a TSK. To think that I'd have dirtied my own hands with the blood of such a pathetic creature. She sneered at the corpse, before calling out for someone to take out the trash. The rest of the flight had been silent most of the way. Mocha and Kurumu had both tried to speak to the two boys. Sukune had managed to make small conversations with them, but Naruto had told them he wasn't in the mood for talking when truthfully he was thinking over the information about fairy tale he'd been given. Currently Naruto, transformed back into Tsukune's uncle, was staring at a flight attendant that had just all but demanded to know what happened to the room. His eyes turned red with 3 tomos slowly swirling around the edge. What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with the room. The flight attendant's expression became dull and expressionless. I'm sorry, sir. He apologized in a monotone, bowing to all 4 of them. I must have been imagining things. If you would follow me. Customs had been fairly easy to get through, just a routine check, really. Even though the people there had given Naruto in disguise a weird look for taking just a backpack, they'd let them pass as Naruto had informed them they were just there for the weekend. When they'd gotten out of the airport, Sukune had waved over a taxi. Where to? The taxi driver asked Sukune's uncle as he looked to be the oldest there. The Monte Carlo, please. Naruto replied with a smile before flashing a wad of cash she'd been able to exchange at the airport. Make it quick, too. It was just before 10 and when they'd arrived outside of the Monte Carlo. After Naruto had paid the correct amount with a little extra to the taxi driver, he got out and the boot of the cab opened to allow them to grab their things. Once they'd all taken a hold of their things, they set their sights on the giant building that was the Monte Carlo for the first time. Naruto's arms fell limply at his side, while his mouth opened in shock as the taxi drove away behind them. That building is absolutely massive. I thought that you said you were in Tokyo, Naruto-san. Sukune commented, his eyes glinting in amusement at seeing the usually carefree blonde gobsmacked. He pushed what had happened on the plane out of his mind at the moment in favor for settling in first, like Naruto had suggested in the first place. Buildings like this shouldn't be much of a surprise to you. It needs to be more. Mocha began, pushing her bottom lip out in a pout at the building they'd be staying in. More like the dorms at school. Naruto gave her a deadpan look, Sukune shook his head while Kurumu nodded her head, agreeing with the vampire. It's just what's a good word for it. Right. Well, sorry to disappoint. Naruto said, tone and expression still deadpan. But not everything can look like it came out of a horror movie. Look across her arms, pouting even more than before. But Naruto-kun, buildings in horror movies have a lot of dignity and character. Don't make it sound like they don't. I totally agree with you. Naruto shook his head, and suppressed a chuckle, ignoring the way Milka stuck her tongue out at him for his sarcastic remark. Well, let's go then. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.